It's the beginning of March and I'm going to sow some seeds. I'm possibly a little bit late in starting these actually, but it's still not too late. I'm going to grow some red peppers, chili peppers, cayenne variety. I'm going to grow golden sunrise tomatoes because those were really surprisingly good last year. And I've got some other tomato varieties here. These are seeds left over from last year, but I have stored them in a cool, dry place, so hopefully these seeds will still be viable. I'm not going to rely too much on these. If these don't come up, I will buy some tomato plants. So I'm going to grow them in these modules. I think I probably only want maybe like 8 chili plants. I only really need 6 tomato plants, so I'll grow a few extra just in case we have some failures. So I think we'll have one little module of golden sunrise, a couple of different tomatoes, and I don't know, maybe only one module of chilies actually. I'm using John Innes based seed compost. John Innes is a formula for different composts, and it includes some things like sand and clay and soil based compost as well as organic material, and particularly good for growing seeds because it'll take care of the drainage and nutrients and things. And of course you can plant seeds in a all-purpose compost like this, but let me just show you the difference. So this is a multi-purpose compost, and you can see it's kind of fibrous, which is fine. This is a seed compost. Look how finely milled this is, and that will just make it much easier for us to actually get the seeds covered by the right amount of compost, just to get a very, very light scattering of soil on top of the seeds. It's also more convenient to fill little modules like this with a finer compost. Anyway, got to find somewhere to put the camera, and then we'll sow some seeds. So much easier to adequately fill those modules with compost when it's finely milled like this. It's essentially all they've done is put it through a process to mill it finely. But I can feel there's grit in this. There's sand and sharp grit in this compost, which will assist with drainage. Good drainage is quite important for young plants. Young plants, seedlings, are especially susceptible to mould and fungal attack. And it won't help if they have wet feet. So I'm just filling those up nicely with compost, and I'm only using like fingertip pressure just to make sure they are actually full of. Okay, and I'm going to rely on this footage that I'm recording now to remind me what's gone in what container. So we're going to have golden sunrise in this first container here. So seeds are in a tiny foil packet. And there won't be very many seeds in there, but I'm just going to tap out 4 seeds. I think I might just move you around here so you can see what's going on. So tiny hole in each of these 4 modules, and I had 4 seeds there, so I seem to have 3 now. I dropped a seed somewhere. Anyway, 1, 2, 3, and the 4th seed goes in there. A little chefy sprinkle of fine compost on top. And then when I water that, that should do it. So that one's golden sunrise. And then in this packet, as I say, we've got some leftovers from last year. So let's have a look and see what we've got. Moneymaker, golden something, golden drop, I think that was called. Gardener's Delight was quite good, and Tigerella was very good. It wasn't a huge cropper, but it did make some tasty tomatoes. So I think we'll have Tigerella in this one. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I think I might have planted 2 in that hole, but we'll see. 4. And again, just a little smattering of compost on the top. Okay, rather than Moneymaker, I think I'll go for Gardener's Delight. Classic tomato variety, this one. And I think this was one of the first to ripen as well. So this is a smaller tomato. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's that one. Marmande, which is a big so-called beef tomato, didn't do all that well last year. I'll have another go with Marmande, I think. They were tasty tomatoes, we just didn't get very many of them. But I'm going for a different approach this year. I've got some tomato rings, and I'm growing my tomatoes on top of the soil in the greenhouse this time. Rather than try and grow them in grow bags, I'm growing them in the border inside the top greenhouse. Although I'm probably going to end up with enough tomato plants that I'll have to grow some down here in the downstairs greenhouse as well. I'm going to try to grow some other things as well. I think I might try growing Cape gooseberries this year. Somewhere I've got a packet of seeds, but I couldn't lay hands on them right now. And then my cayenne peppers are going to be right at this end. And when I go back indoors, I will label these. I don't get many seeds in there. Does it say how many seeds? 8. Seed fill 8. It says at the bottom of the packet. Okay. Oh yeah, there might be 8 seeds there. Look at that. Okay, only need 4. So that's that. Now when I get those indoors, I'm going to give them a little water. I've got this transparent cover that can go on there after I've given it a little water. The bottom tray hasn't got holes in it. These modules have got holes in them. So the water can drain out of here, but it won't go all over the windowsill. So that's the plan. Okay, I actually managed to find some tags. Just reusing that tag I've written on it. I'll know what that's about. So Golden Sunrise, Tigerella, Gardener's Delight, Marmande, and then my cayenne peppers. And I might as well do my watering here in the kitchen actually. So this is a gravy jug, but it's got a bit of water in it. And look how easily that water gets into that compost. That's not the seed that just came up there. It's a little bit of mica or perlite or something. So that's another feature of this John Innes seed compost, is look how free draining it is. And how easily the compost is wetted by the little bit of water there. So I'll give those a good water in. And then we've got to keep these just moist, not waterlogged. Just add a bit more water, perhaps with a spray or something, over the next few days. And we should get germination within a week or 2. So we'll come back and look at these hopefully before the end of this video. Right, there we go, and that's going to live on this windowsill here. I have to walk past this several times a day, so hopefully these will not dry out or get too cold or anything like that, which hampered my seedlings last year, and I ended up having to buy plants from the garden centre. Hopefully I will have my own plants this year from seed. Sheet of plastic underneath there to protect the windowsill from any spillages. More seed planting today, so I've got Cape gooseberries to plant. One thing I think I am going to grow next year is these Cape gooseberries. Relatives of the tomato. They need similar sort of care as tomatoes. I think I can probably grow these in the downstairs greenhouse after we finished using it for all of the seeds in the start of the year. I've grown these before, and I grew them from seeds that I bought in a garden centre in a packet, and I was disappointed. I ended up with very seedy, sort of not very sweet fruits. But I bought these the other day on the market. I just bought a punnet of Cape gooseberries, and these are really nice. In fact, I'll taste this one now and tell you what it's like. So this variety is very juicy, slightly sort of orangey flavour, tiny little seeds. The seeds are quite hard, but they're very small. In fact, I think I've swallowed them all. Anyway, when you buy these, there's always one in the packet that's damaged or mouldy or whatever. So that one, I squeezed the seeds out and I've saved them here. Just dried them out on a napkin. And I will grow these seeds next year. So, assuming this wasn't an F1 hybrid fruit, it may have been, I should get something like the same kind of fruits. So, let's make a little seed packet, just to save these for next year. So just a sheet of paper, fold it in half that way, fold in the two ends like that. And what you can actually do is tuck that end, tuck this corner here inside that fold, and then pick up the last sheet there, and there's a seed packet that, as long as that stays all folded, it won't lose its contents. Obviously don't drop them right down the middle there. If you drop them into that last fold there, that's a decent seed packet. So I'll just loosen these all from that napkin. Now I'll just stuck on a tiny bit with the sugary juice. Most of those went in, some did not. Okay, and so just save those seeds in there. So I've got about 50 seeds there. I'm probably only going to grow half a dozen plants, but I'll start a few more than that in case of failures and damping off and whatnot. There we go. So that's next year's Cape gooseberry seeds. I'll just secure the top of that packet with a paper clip or something. There is a possibility that this might not go well, because when you save seeds from something you bought in a grocery shop, it might well be that the thing you enjoyed was an F1 hybrid, and so if it's like that, then there's no guarantee that what grows will resemble the thing that you enjoyed, because, you know, genetics and stuff, it just might not actually be the same as its parent. Whereas if it's a named variety, it's a bit more reliable. But anyway, I don't know if that's the case with these. They might be an F1, in which case we might get something quite variable here. In fact, we might get a variety of different things here, but that could be interesting. So people often say that you shouldn't save seeds from, you know, from vegetables and fruits you bought at the grocery store, the greengrocers, and they're kind of right, except, you know, what's the worst that could happen here? Worst, I suppose the worst could happen is these won't germinate at all. The second worst thing that could happen is they're just not the same as the thing they were grown from. But that might be interesting. I'm just going to label them up, and I've got another one of those propagators. I'll put that indoors, give these a water, and we'll see what happens. So as before, good watering in, and hopefully we'll see some germination in a week or two. Now, despite my previous witterings about saving seeds from potentially F1 hybrid fruits and vegetables, I am going to do that. So I've got some seeds here that I saved from Scotch bonnets that I bought in a local store, and I'm going to plant some of these in here. I'm going to plant 2 per pot, and then I'll pinch out the weaker seedling of the 2, or perhaps divide them, not sure. Anyway, 1 seed in each hole, total of 8 seeds. The all-important label, almost readable. Alright, and so these can go in that space, in this propagator, and I've got 1 more space left for something else, which I'm hoping will arrive fairly soon. And again, just give those a water in. And the idea here will be to keep these moist but not saturated. I've just brought the seeds up to the surface a little bit there, I think, but so just cover those back up. Okay, so yeah, going to keep those moist but not saturated. And I've got 1 more space here, which I'm saving for something I've got on order, but it hasn't arrived yet. While we're here, just check on the tomatoes. No sign of germination yet, but also doesn't look like it needs any water at the moment, so we'll just leave that be. And now we wait. We are off for a spring walk. It's March, middle of March. Off for a spring walk in the woods to see what we can find. These are hazel catkins. We've looked at these in previous videos. Probably just about coming to an end now, really, hazel catkins. But these are supposedly edible. Never tried them before. But people toast them and add them to things, or they can be dried and ground up and added to flour to make bread. I'll probably have to remember to try that next year. We're just looking around at what we can see here. Lots and lots of bluebell foliage. So this will be a fantastic spot for bluebells a little bit later in the year, next month, as well as quite a lot of wild garlic mixed in amongst it. Obviously, if we're going to pick wild garlic, we need to make sure we don't pick bluebell leaves because they're toxic, and they are growing together. So here we are, wild garlic, ramsons, and bluebells. Oh, and Eva's barking at rocks. So we've got wood ear here, growing on elder, quite a lot of it actually. I'm tempted to pick it, but I've got quite a lot at home dried already, so I don't think I need it. So I think we'll leave that be. Some more of it there on a branch that's fallen down, and some kind of white mildewy thing. I can see loads more wood ear up there as well, actually. So on that branch there, probably if we look around, because there's a lot of dead elder here, probably find quite a lot of it. Yeah, some more up over on that bit of that branch there. Yeah, and on the side there, all on the east facing side, which I presume is against the prevailing weather or something like that. So yeah, we could pick those, but I'm not going to, because like I say, I've got loads of that at home dried. I don't need to, so I think we'll leave it. I think we will have some of this ramsons. This is a broadleaf wild garlic species that's very common in kind of shady woodlands in the UK. This is in a very early stage of development here, so there's no signs of any flower buds. So even though by the time you see this video, the development will be further along, it might even be producing flowers, depending on where you live. If you live further up the country, it might still be later. But anyway, this is pickable from this point onwards, and we're going to just pick some of these nice young fresh leaves. They've got a very strong garlic onion aroma, but actually a very mild onion taste, and so when it's cooked, it's a bit like eating spinach mixed with a little bit of onion. So we're going to pick some of that. I think that will go in tonight's dinner. Who lives in that one? I think it's badgers, Eva. I don't think they'll give you a very friendly reception. Come on, leave them alone. Enough, come on. So tempting to have a bit of a wander around here where they've done all this forestry, but a lot of the dead wood here is a bit too fresh and new. Next year, when all this has had a chance to rot down and start returning into the soil, this could be a really productive spot for mushrooms, assuming they don't come and just clear this all out. I don't think they will. I think they'll leave this to rot where it stands. It looks like that's what their intention is. This is all, a lot of this is ash, and this has probably been managed, this bit of woodland, for ash dieback, which is a disease that's affecting ash trees in the UK. So a lot of ash trees are being felled out of woodland now to try to mitigate the spread of the disease, but to be honest, it's a lost cause. So yeah, we're going to lose a lot of our ash trees, probably most of them actually, unless something happens to make them resistant or something like that. But anyway, next year this could be a good spot for morels, assuming this wood is left to just break down and go back into the soil. Assuming they're in the locality at all anyway. It might just be that something's not quite right for them. What we have got here is a lot of red currant bushes. Loads and loads of red currant around here. So that's a thing that might be worth coming back here for later in the year. I picked one or two berries, red currants from here. Didn't find very many last year. I suspect the birds get them before anybody else. But yeah, it's quite a bit of it here. I'm seeing raspberries and brambles and various other things as well. I'm going to use some of the greens from the ramsons in this curry. This is a vegetable curry. Lentils, parsnips, onions, sweet potato, carrots, celery, pepper, a little bit of apple and some chutney and curry sauce in there. That's just got to cook away now for those lentils to hydrate and for all the vegetables to go soft. I've got some fava beans cooking on the back here. Some dried fava beans which need to just be boiled and rehydrated. They'll go in towards the end. I've got, this is the leafy bits off the end of the celery, and I'll put this in right at the end of cooking. And then ramsons. This is about half the leaves of ramsons I picked today, and I've given them a serious wash because it's been raining a lot, and so there's a lot of soil splash on low growing things. So when I say a serious wash, what I did is I've actually given them a rinse first, then let them sit for about 5 minutes, which lets that water just loosen any of the dirt that's on there, and then another thorough rinse. So it's a 2-stage washing process with a pause in between, which sort of allows the dry dirt to turn into mud, and then mud is easier to wash off than crumbly dirt. That's the theory anyway. So yeah, second rinse is done, just waiting for those to drain, then I'll chop those up and they'll go in at the last minute. The whole kitchen is going to smell strongly of garlic now, but as I've said before about this ramsons, it has a really powerful aroma, but a lot of that doesn't translate to a strong flavour. It's a really mild flavoured onion. Right, we are close to the end of cooking now. Actually, I'm just going to turn that off so you can hear me. So the lentils and the beans have kind of almost cooked away. So now, in with the celery greens and the ramsons. And I will give that a little bit more cooking than I might do for spinach, because actually I want to just not just wilt it down, I want to cook out some of the flavour into the curry here. So this is going to do more than just wilt, which might mean it loses some of its vibrant green colour, but it will repay that in terms of the flavour it adds to the sauce. And it's going to be served with some whole wheat paratha, which I didn't make. I buy these frozen, and actually you can just bake them in the oven and they go all flaky and nice. You can cook them in a pan as well, but it's difficult to do 4 at a time that way. Okay, so that's ready to go. Now it's a huge batch, and we're not going to sit and eat all of this today, but the point of cooking this is it's actually quite difficult to make a small batch of this sort of thing, because there's a minimum, minimum of 1 carrot, 1 sweet potato. We'll make a big batch. I'll freeze a lot of it in batches, then we can just pull that out and thaw it and warm out for a light lunch or a dinner another time. So let's get this dished up, and then I'll give it a little taste. I'm not gonna take the camera to the table. So this is a vegetarian curry, not quite vegan. It's got butter in it. I think that, yeah, I used some butter for frying the vegetables. Probably should have done that before I put it on the plates. And so yeah, these paratha, which are now crisped up a little bit on the side. And there we go. That is dinner. I'm just going to give this a little taste, just so I can give you an impression of what it's like with those ramsons in there. It's good. It's quite a mild curry. I shall add some chili flakes at the table. But yeah, you can definitely get, there's a kind of sweet garlic flavour that's infused through it. Really, really mild and really friendly sort of garlic flavour that's infused all the way through it. So definitely worth getting out there and picking that today. Okay, more seed sowing. Today I'm going to plant Florence fennel. Now this needs to be planted directly into the soil, and I have to prepare like a seed drill for this. And this soil texture here is a little bit coarse. I'm a bit worried the seeds might just disappear into nowhere, might kind of scatter a little bit in the soil. So I'm going to prepare a seed drill using some of my seed compost on my John Innes. So just going to move this weed suppressant fabric back, and my seed drill is going to go in here. So that's just going to be a case of scratching a sort of shallow trench like this, and then I'm going to fill that in with some of this compost. Now, I'm hoping this compost will just allow me to sow the seeds in a nice neat line without them sort of bouncing down holes and cavities in the soil. So, okay, 2 hands now for planting the seeds. So Florence fennel is a variety of fennel that produces a bulb at the bottom of the stems. So unlike regular fennel, which is kind of feathery, this is a bulbous plant. Now it says to sow this thinly and then thin out later when it's grown a little bit. So I will do my best to do that. I think that's about as thin as I can go. And then we'll give those a covering with a little bit more of this compost, which I can then pat down. Hopefully the thinnings can still be used in the kitchen. So when we thin these out, we can maybe have the very young fennel plants in a salad or something like that. That's a weed. So that's coming out. Right, a little bit of water. Actually, I may not bother with a bit of water. I might just put a bit of soil over the top. We'll no doubt have some more rain fairly soon. So I think we'll just leave that as is and let the rain water that in. The rain will do a more gentle job of that than my watering can. So, shallots, fennel. While we're here, I'm just going to have a quick look at how things are settling in. So, my dwarf mulberry's got lots of growth on it, especially lots of buds down there at the bottom of the stem. So that looks like it's going to produce more bushy growth. The loquat, the buds are starting to open. We've got some good growth on these leaves on all 5 stems. There are various other stems there that look like they might die off, but never mind. The pineapple guava seems to be settling in nicely. And the Saskatoon berry, it looks like those are flower buds, so it looks like we might be going to get some flowers and maybe even a crop of berries this year. Today I'm going to make a version of the fish stew that I showed in passing in the Charmouth Beach Treasures video. This is based on kind of a recipe that I picked up from my mum, who makes something like this quite frequently in Spain. I'm couching that in fairly vague terms because this is a really flexible, barely a recipe kind of idea, concept thing. Anyway, today these are the vegetables we're going to be using. I've got a leek, you could use onions or shallots. I've got fennel, you could use celery. Red pepper, carrot, turnip and potato. For the fish, my mum always uses hake. I haven't got hake today. I've got some pollock fillets which were frozen, and I've got some raw king prawns as well. And for the liquid, in Spain my mum is spoiled for choice. She can get a variety of cartons or bottles of ready-made fish stock. Not so here, although I could make fish stock from fish bones and shrimp heads and things like that. But today I'm just going to be using a stock cube, a Knorr fish stock cube. And because these aren't actually all that seafoody, I'm going to be adding a bit of shrimp paste. That's probably enough wittering. Let's get preparing. Leeks often have quite a bit of dirt inside the leaves, and this one is definitely a case where that's true. So what we're going to do is cut this lengthways from about there, and then I'll just run it under the tap like that and open up all of those leaves and rinse out all that dirt. Now that I'm confident that's nice and clean, I'm just going to slice it again lengthways like that and then chop it up, which will render it into nice little diced pieces. Now I have heard of people doing this the other way around, where you dice it like this first and then put this all in a colander and rinse it. I've tried that and I found it a lot more difficult to get all of the sand and grit off of it, because obviously once it's chopped up like this, there's a lot more surface area here for dirt to get accidentally stuck to. So I found it harder to get clean if you dice then wash than if you wash then dice. So I've got a big pan here which is already on the heat, but it's not sizzling hot. And my leek's going to just go straight in there, and that'll start to cook while I prepare the other vegetables. So there can be the same dirt retention problem with fennel, but I don't often find it to be the case. So I'll just wash that, I think, and we'll probably find we can dice that completely. Carrot I will peel and dice. Pepper just needs a little rinse. We'll just dice up as is. Now fennel is such a tasty vegetable that these little bits I trim off here I will save, and those will go in my stock box in the freezer for when I make chicken stock. Not all vegetable trimmings are necessarily worth keeping in this sense, but fennel I feel like it is. Now as I say, you could use celery for this. I quite often do use celery instead, but fennel has a particular affinity for fish. This was not a completely whole red pepper. This was about 3/4 of a red pepper. 1/4 having gone in a salad or something yesterday. So starting a sauce or a stew with a combination of onion, celery, peppers and carrot is nothing particularly new. Slight variation on this because we're using a red pepper instead of perhaps a green one, and we're using fennel instead of celery, and a leek instead of an onion. But this is essentially similar to a mirepoix, and it's interesting, mirepoix is the French term, and other cultures and languages have something similar with different names. Anyway, I'm just going to gently sizzle these vegetables until the fennel and the carrots are starting to go soft. Meanwhile, that fish stock cube, together with maybe like about a teaspoonful of shrimp paste, I'm going to make this up to a stock of about probably 350 ml. There will be more liquid to add than this, because there are going to be tomatoes in there, but also I might add more water. But this is a good start for my fish stock. I'll make it up to about 400 ml, something like that. Yeah, and that smells like a more reasonable fish stock than I would just get from the cube. That shrimp paste is really kind of punching above its weight. Over here you can see these vegetables have not only reduced in volume a bit, but they've kind of got some ever so slightly caramelised edges. I'm not looking for deep browning here, but I do just want to make sure that the fennel is soft before we go any further with any other cooking. So I'll turn that down now, and then that fish stock can go in there. And the lid on, and we'll now just simmer those vegetables for about another 5 minutes, mostly to soften the carrots now. We need to get the other vegetables prepared. So my turnip, and this is what we would call a turnip here, this is a white fleshed version of this. A yellow fleshed version of this we would call a swede, which I think in some places in the world is called a rutabaga. But this is a turnip. It's going to need a fair bit of peeling and trimming. I'm just going to do that now. And then when we get down to the pure white bit, we'll dice that and put that in as well. Now turnip might seem like a bit of an odd choice here, and maybe it is. But it is one thing that I have kept original to my mum's recipe for this. I think you could certainly use a Japanese radish, a daikon or a mooli. But turnip is one of the things that my mum always puts in this. And so I'm going to carry on doing that. Something like that. And then that can go straight in there. The key point of this stew is we've got to cook this until this is definitely tender. So yeah, there are no specific cooking times for this. We are going to pretty much do this by eye. So we're going to cook this until the vegetables are tender. And we could do with a bit more liquid now. So I'm going to use some passata. And just to make sure we're not wasting any of that in that carton, I'm just going to put a bit of water in there, shake it around, tip that out. Also at this stage, about a teaspoonful of smoked paprika. Now you might be wondering, where's the salt? Someone always does. Don't forget that stock cube and the shrimp paste that we put in there actually contains quite a bit of salt. So I shall not be adding any more salt until this is cooked, and then I might season to taste. So just bring that to a simmer, lid back on. Just going to simmer that for a tiny while before I put the potato in there, because the potato will take less time to cook than the turnip. I like to finish this stew with some fresh greens and herbs. This is actually a bag of what's supposed to be salad, but there is nothing to stop you cooking with this. And so I'm just going to pick out of here some of the leaves of spinach and beet. These are little beetroot leaves. That's a baby spinach leaf. I should avoid picking out the other things like like lettuce. There's no reason why you can't cook with that, but I'm just choosing not to today. Of course, starting with a bag of baby spinach would probably be easier than this, but this is what I got. I'm just going to chop those up and set them aside. So we're just going to reserve that for now, because this goes in right at the last minute. But while we're here, I've also got some herbs, some fresh parsley from the garden. And that will also go with that spinach. And some fresh basil from the windowsill. Now people say you shouldn't chop basil, you should tear it, because it does bruise, as you can see here. But if you're cooking it, if you're going to put it in a stew, that doesn't matter. If you want to put it on a salad and you don't want that discoloration, that dark sort of bruised colour, then you might want to tear it. But we're cooking this anyway, so it's all going to go dark green. The turnip's been cooking away for a while, so time for the potato now. In fact, I'm going to probably put 2 potatoes in here, so I'll just peel and dice these. In terms of size of pieces to dice things into here, the choice is really yours. If you dice them smaller, they'll cook quicker. If you dice them bigger, you might have a more interesting texture in the stew. I suppose the upper limit is what will fit on a spoon. And the lower limit is, you know, what will still be recognisable as a piece of vegetable after it's cooked. These are about centimetre dice for the potatoes. Those are going to go straight in the pan now. Everything else bubbling away nicely there. And now I'm just going to simmer this until that potato is nearly tender. I say nearly because we haven't put any fish in here yet. The fish is going to take probably a minute or 2 to cook, but I do need to allow for that time. Anyway, I'll simmer that now for probably 10 minutes to cook those potatoes. A few minutes of time have elapsed. We're now at the point where nothing in here is raw. So this would be a good time to have a little taste for seasoning. Yeah, and I was right not to add any more salt. That is actually perfectly balanced as it is. That shrimp paste and the fish stock cube have contributed enough salt for that to be adequately seasoned for my liking. Now while we're here, actually, let's just talk about what if you don't like one of the ingredients in here? Well, if you don't like one of the things in here, substitute something you do like. Nothing is sacred here. I don't always put potatoes in this. Sometimes I put cauliflower. I might use sweet potato. Maybe you don't like parsley and basil. You could use coriander, cilantro, chives, or spring onions, or some other green herb. As I say, nothing is sacred about this recipe. That's part of the reason why the whole preparation here has been rather casual and loose. It's just because this is a case of put what you like in there, because then you'll like what comes out. Now for me, one of those things might be peppers, hot peppers. I've got some Scotch bonnets here. I would love to put some Scotch bonnets in here and give this a little bit of a fiery punch, but Jenny doesn't like that, so I've got to adapt. I will probably chop up one of these Scotch bonnets, put it in a little dish by the side of my plate, and then I can add this at the table. While we're on that subject, I really don't think a bit of black pepper will go amiss. Right, so just been testing these vegetables. So the carrots, for example, tender, but a tiny, tiny little bit crisp, which is good. That's exactly what I want. Potato. Fully cooked and not crisp. So we are at the point now where the next thing happens. And that next thing is, in goes the white fish. This is pollock, but cod, hake, haddock, any white fish would do. Or any fish, to be honest. You could put salmon in here. And some prawns. Raw king prawns. We'll just turn up the heat. You can see that fish is almost cooked already. I'm just going to simmer that for about 2 minutes. Okay, and another minute, and I'm turning off the heat now because this is going to cook in the residual heat that's in the sauce there. And in go all of those green leaves. So that's spinach, beet leaves, parsley and basil. So that can all go in there. And I've just a couple of pairs of tongs here because what I'm going to do is just break up that white fish into chunks. Not shredding it completely, just going to tear it up into little pieces that can be shared out a little bit more fairly. Okay, a little stir gently now so that we don't completely shred up that fish. But a little stir just to fold it over to get those green leaves in there. Lid back on while I slice up some bread. So I've got a nice wholemeal and seed loaf here. Now I think Because we've got potatoes in the stew, I think we're probably only going to have like a slice and a half of bread with this. Right, time to serve up this delicious seafood stew. And we've easily made enough here for 4 people. It is nicer freshly cooked like this, but it does stand and it can be reheated the next day. It will lose a little bit of the freshness that makes it really nice, but it does still work the next day. Right, that's that. And that's pretty much ready to serve. I will just have a little taste of this just so we can get an idea of what it's like. Oh gosh, it's really good. I think it probably could use a little squeeze of lemon. I'll give Jenny the option. Just a tiny little drizzle of lemon juice on the top there, just to brighten that up a bit. Let's try that now. Definitely. And we did talk about hot peppers, so
2 Scotch bonnets later.
a little bit of Scotch bonnet in there. We'll just mix that in, and I think that will go rather nicely. Oh yes. So there we go, that's how I make my seafood stew. It's never exactly the same twice, but this is the general idea. So now I think we're going to go back to garden shrimp again for even more seed planting. Day later, let's just have a look at these again. So we've got 2 seedlings coming up in that pot and 2 in that pot of golden sunrise. Now I'm sure I didn't put 2 seeds in there, 2 seeds in there, and none in either of those 2. So I've either put in 2 seeds accidentally, or they were stuck together, or perhaps, I don't know if tomato seeds are ever polyembryonic. But anyway, we've also got 1 of Garden's Delight coming up. Nothing else at the moment, but clearly it won't be very long. So actually, I'm going to leave these off of here during the day. I'm going to leave this cover off so these don't get mouldy. So they get some nice air, get a chance to develop a little bit, and then this cover can go back on at night to keep them from getting too cold. So definitely something going on here. My golden sunrise seeds, 3 of the 4 pots I planted have sprouted so far. All 3 of those have produced 2 seedlings. I'm certain I didn't put 2 seeds in each hole though. And after a little bit of research, a word which here means typing things into Google and pretending you know more than you do, it turns out that tomatoes are sometimes polyembryonic, which means each seed may contain more than 1 embryo plant ready to grow, and in practice means that each seed may produce more than 1 sprout. This is very common in citrus actually. When you grow orange or lemon seedlings from pips for fun usually, you very often get more than 1 seedling per seed. There's a different thing going on there as well with citrus, but that's another story. But it turns out tomatoes can do that too, and so I'm pretty sure what's happening here is this variety has a tendency to be polyembryonic, and we've got 2 seedlings from each seed. That does present a challenge, because I don't really want to plant out 2 seedlings together. So I don't think I'm actually going to try and separate these before I plant them. What I'll probably do is I'll let them grow on a little bit, and I'll snip 1 out. I might let them grow to the point where the one that I snip out I can use as a cutting. Okay, more planting today. I'm going to plant some radishes next to the fennel here, next to where I planted the fennel. But while we're up here, let's just see. We've got the shallots starting to show. Little shoots popping up all over the place. That's good. And I think if we come over here, yes, broad bean shoot right there. See that bright green shoot? That's a broad bean. There's another one just in there. Let me see if I can actually point it out. It's right there. Some more over there. So broad beans, second crop, are coming up. We're going to have to get the netting off of these ones because look, there's flowers there. The winter broad beans are starting to flower now, so we're going to have to get the netting off of that side so the bees can get in here and pollinate them and make some broad beans. But first, radishes, and I'm going to plant them probably about, I don't know, maybe 15-20 centimeters away from the fennel there, because they won't be in the ground long. I've got 2 varieties, well, 2 packs here today. I've got this one called Viola and this one called Bright Lights, which actually looks like it might contain some of the same. I wonder if that was just... Hey, look. That's the same picture. That's the same radish. on those 2 packs. No, I don't know. Anyway, but it looks like Bright Lights might contain some viola. But anyway, we're going to plant both of them in here. These seeds were reduced because they're last year's seed. So as with the fennel, I'm just going to make a little seed drill. I'm not going to bother with the seed compost in there this time. I'm just going to make a drill here like that, about 1.5 centimeters deep. And then these radish seeds, which we're going to find look a lot like mustard seeds probably. Yeah, so little round things. Just got to sprinkle them in there fairly sparingly because they need a bit of space. We will probably have to thin these out, but the thinnings are completely edible, and so we'll be able to eat those whole, probably with their leaves. Just toss the whole thing in a salad. Right, so that's one row. That's Bright Lights. I think I might just move that fabric back and put another row in of viola. Now these rows can go quite close together, so I'm going to put them about, that's only about 15 centimeters apart, but that will be plenty of space. Radishes don't need to get big. In fact, it's best if they don't get big. Okay, so that's my seed drill there. And again, these seeds are going to look exactly the same, just little brown things about the size of mustard seeds. Don't know if you can see that, but those are going to go into that seed drill. So now I'll just cover those over like that. Just tap the soil down, tamp it down. And I've made a little tag just so I don't lose that row of seedlings. I've got a little tag there that can go in. And same here for fennel. Just a little tag so we can keep track of where everything is. Today we've come for a walk at Badbury Rings. This is Badbury Rings here. It's an Iron Age hill fort composed of concentric rings of earthworks. And just got to keep the dog occupied. And we come here actually because dogs are allowed to run off the lead. There's no livestock here, so Eva is allowed free roam. So Badbury Rings, in local legend, is the place where King Arthur fought the Battle of Mount Badon, and some sort of battle where Arthur's army was fighting some bad guys. Arthur did all the killing, 960 people, which is an oddly specific number. You'd think it would be 1,000, but 960, presumably the number has some significance. It's also, in legend, the place where King Arthur lived, disguised as a raven, which is, you know, about as plausible as the rest of the story. Anyway, this is Badbury Rings. Oh, I was told there was no livestock here. Eva, come here now. I mean, the chances of Eva actually chasing these beasts is minimal, but we'll keep her on the lead. So I'll try and get you a kind of Google Maps aerial view of this hill fort, because it's a quite conspicuous system of concentric dikes. If you can imagine, if you're the bad guys are trying to attack this hill fort and you have to run up and down over these hills, by the time you get to the top there, or by the time you're climbing this slope here to the sort of inner compound, you're exhausted and you're downhill of the archers who are up there, or people throwing rocks and spears and firing arrows at you as you're down the bottom here. And of course this bit here is a kind of gateway entrance, but this means you've only got to really defend one spot. Right, it looks like the livestock were only in one place. We will keep a close eye on Eva, but I think we're okay for...
Amazing place.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the I think, inner ring of the hill fort, so there probably would have been like a wooden palisade or something on top of this. Right, well I think we'll go to the middle of the woods here and see if we can see any ravens that look like they might be kings in disguise. Quite strange to find a pond at the top of a hill. Okay, and so we reach the summit of Mount Badden. There's a marker stone here. It might be an Ordnance Survey trig point actually. Let's have a look. It's interesting, even here you can see the traces of concentric rings of earthworks, so even here they're not quite finished with that. It's remarkably squishy and marshy considering we're at the top of a hill. But we have had some pretty serious rainfall just recently. But we have had a lot of serious rainfall recently. The River Stour just down the way, down in that valley there, was flooded. We had trouble getting here today actually. So, oh, it's one of these panoramic viewpoint things that will tell you where everything is. But up in that tree, I don't know if you can see it, up in that tree there is a raven. Just one raven. You might hear it in a minute. What you got then? Yep. What are we looking at though? So, Corfe Mullen is over that way. Wimborne, Minster, Kingston, Lacey.
They're all that way.
Yeah.
This way. It's all places.
Sturminster Church, River Stour is down that way. Woodbury Hill. So Charlton, Marshall, it's all basically directions for various towns and local hills. Eva! Local hills and rivers and towns. Okay, well I think what we'll do, I think we'll probably walk down here, that way, pick up the path. I think there's a walk where you can walk off to some woods and things up that way.
Yeah, you can do whatever. I mean, you can follow the map in the book. But
I think there's probably a path that comes out this side. We'll have a look, shall we?
Yeah.
Maybe not, actually, a bit muddy there. We might go back down the way we came, because there's a path that goes off to the right and goes round. Anyway, that is Badbury Rings. There's another pond over there. So whether these ponds were part of a moat, or whether they were here for drinking water, or even actually perhaps to keep fish alive. Although that's more of a kind of monastery type of thing, really, to have a pond where you stock it with fish that have been caught locally and just keep them alive in the monastery pond, so that you can have fish on Fridays. Yeah, so I think what we might do, yes, is mount this outer ring and walk round on the top of there, see what we can see. I was assured by the guidebook that there were no livestock in this area and that dogs can run free, and that's the signage on the car park actually says pretty much that, but there are cattle here. Eva is not likely to chase cows. She would chase sheep, certainly would chase deer if she saw them. You alright there, doggo? Queen of the castle? Yeah, I know. Okay, no, quiet. I'm not throwing anything here, don't be silly. So, yes, we'll just walk around the top of these earthworks, I think. This was what everybody seems to be doing. Yeah. So yes, you can imagine, as a defensive position, defending against somebody trying to climb up this hillside here, this very steep bank, you have a distinct advantage against them. So that marker stone in the middle of the hill fort there was a viewpoint thing, so that points you out what direction things are, although of limited use probably when the trees come into leaf, because these oak trees will pretty much obscure most of the views from inside the kind of inner part of the hill fort there. But I suppose, you know, there's nothing to stop people walking to the edge in a particular direction and looking for one of the landmarks that's pointed out there, the various towns and valleys and rivers and things that were marked on that sign. I see down there, I don't know if you were to see it on the camera, a butterfly, brimstone, one of the earliest butterflies you see in spring, one of the first to sort of emerge and be active. And up here we have got what is fairly obviously an Ordnance Survey trig point. We'll have a close look at that when we get there. Now what we'll find in the top of this trig point is a mounting plate, a sort of mounting place for a map maker's theodolite or other kind of map making surveying equipment. And it consists of 3 bars or 3 channels into which an instrument, a measuring instrument, can be locked, and it will provide a precise datum for that measuring equipment. So let's have a look. Yeah. So there we go. So this is Ordnance Survey triangulation station, it says. And so yes, a piece of map making equipment would be bedded into these 3 bars here, and 3 of them, because that then means it automatically centers itself on this datum. And then you'd have a look at wherever the corresponding trig points are. So the precise position of this trig point would be known, and you'll be able to survey landmarks and triangulate and work out distance and angle by triangulating from here and 1 or 2 other trig points. So yeah, I don't know where the nearest trig points would be. There's a hilltop over there that looks likely, there's one over there that also looks promising, and there's one way over there. Anyway, that's a trig point. That's what that's for. It's for map making. Of course, largely before the era of global positioning systems and whatnot. So I think it's time for a spot of lunch, and there isn't anywhere dry to sit on the ground, but I can see a fallen tree over there. We might find a log to sit on and have our lunch. These are interesting. I don't know how recent these are. Obviously little step paths that people have made to get up on top of the next ring. I don't know how recent they would be. I don't know if they're ancient or if they're comparatively recent. And so from here on the south side, you can just see over there, that's the River Stour or Stour in flood. We had actual trouble getting here today because the river is in flood, burst its banks. The sat-nav took us through Sturminster Marshall, but it was impassable because of flooded roads. So we had to take a big diversion to get round it. We'll go a different way home. So yeah, there's a fallen tree up there. I think we'll go and sit on there, have a bite to eat. Lunch is nothing elaborate, just a bit of fruit, some cheese, some nuts, a bit of Bombay mix. That'll keep me going. So leaving Badbury Rings now, we're going to walk out the other side of the hill fort here. There's a path, I think, which will take us around this piece of woodland and then in a kind of big circular walk. Looks like it could be a good place to pick blackberries. Lots of brambles across here. But yeah, it's quite a complex system of dikes here. Obviously a huge investment of effort must have gone into constructing this. You imagine digging this and piling this up with nothing more than wooden buckets antler picks and shovels. Quite an undertaking. Must have taken several lifetimes to construct, I would think. And it's not just soil that's been piled up here, actually. This is chalk that's been dug. So the underlying surface is underneath the very thin topsoil is chalk. This is a chalk hill, so that's what these rings are constructed of. You can see the white chalk just coming out here and there. So yeah, this was all dug out and piled up. I mean, I don't think much of it's been transported very far. Much of what's been piled up onto the banks will have been dug out of the ditches, but even so, if you imagine doing that with just nothing more than human labour and perhaps wooden or leather buckets and wooden shovels and maybe picks made of antler, I don't suppose the digging implements would have been iron, although this is an Iron Age fort. Iron would still have been quite a valuable commodity, possibly too valuable to use for those sorts of purposes in those days. More likely used for weapons, things like that. So there is a marked trail through this beech woodland. We'll stick to the trail as much as we can, although we'll see if there's anything interesting, flowers or fungi, to take a look at. Some quite big beech trees here. That's probably a couple of 100 years old, maybe as much as 400 or something like that. And I see some fallen beech trees up ahead as well, so we will have a look and see if there's any oyster mushrooms, because that can be a common thing to find on fallen beech trees any time of year really. Yeah, it's weird that we're on top of a hill, but it's incredibly wet up here, just because the amount of rainfall we've had has been quite phenomenal. We'll just have a little wander up here and see what we can see from up on this small rise. Well, that looks like somebody was intending to have a campfire there, which is perhaps not a great idea. Well, I wonder if that's the same raven we saw earlier, up in that oak tree, up in that bare oak tree up there. That is a raven, because I heard it call, and actually the size of it means it can't really be very much else. Oh, it's calling to another one. Ah, there's the nest over there. See that conifer? There's this kind of dark structure in the middle of the top, and that's probably the nest. I heard a call, so presumably that one's off looking for food. That one's probably sitting on eggs or tending young. So English bluebells coming up here, and these here, the white ones here, yeah, they're anemones, wood anemones. Yeah, anemones are often a little bit earlier than bluebells. Right, well, onward. Let's see what we can find down here. Yes, there's a closer look at some wood anemones.
Yeah, they're lovely.
A bit boggy down there. A bit squelchy in there. Hopefully you don't come back through any of that. What you got, Eva? And there's a closer look at some English bluebells just about to come out. Just emerging. Take a little detour around this boggy section here, but also let's just admire these primroses. quintessential spring flower here in England. Beautiful primroses. So here we've got an area of, looks like mostly birch and hazel that's been coppiced. Mostly hazel. And those poles have been stacked there, probably going to be used for something. Maybe somebody's going to split those and make some woven hurdles or something. And there's a laid hedge here as well. I'm not sure whether this has actually just been constructed from cut down timber as a hedge, or if this is actually saplings that have been partially cut and then bent over. It is sprouting. It's a willow or poplar or something like that. Something in the willow family, judging by the catkins, possibly pussy willow, maybe poplar or something like that. But it's sprouting, which might mean that it is actually growing here and it's been hedge laid. I'm not sure. So this kind of management of woodland, it always looks really brutal, but actually it's what a lot of these pieces of woodland or copses or coppices would have been used for in times gone by. Before we had plastics and steel fence posts and all of those sorts of things, people would make fences and hurdles and whatnot out of timber products, and the timber products would need to be made from these thin poles, and that would necessitate coppicing the trees, which means cutting them down every few years, letting them produce lots of really vigorous straight shoots, and then letting those grow on for a couple of years and then cutting them down again. It's a cycle, and it's not destructive to the trees because they are able to cope with it, and it's a managed woodland. It's not completely wild. In fact, so over there's a coppice that hasn't been cut down. We'll have a look and see. Presumably this section over here to the left is going to be next year's coppice, or maybe this year's. But you can see those dense clusters of thin stems. That's not natural. Those trees have been planted and then cut down, and cutting them down causes them to produce these straight upright poles, which can then be harvested as a woodland product. So it's a productive woodland. So a bluebell being visited by, that was a bee fly, not a bee. It looks like a bee, but it's actually a parasite that lives on bees. Eva. Lesser celandine there, lovely yellow spring flower. And look at these petals. So if you look closely at these petals, you can see they're shiny. Can you see the little highlight, little specular highlight there of the light shining off them? And they're like a little parabolic antenna, and they face the sun, and it's a reflective surface, and that little spot right there where that insect's about to land is slightly warmer than the rest of the environment. And so as the insect is there sipping some nectar, it's also getting slightly warmed up, which is important for insects because they don't generate their own body heat, and if it's too cold they can't fly. And so bees and other pollinators are encouraged to come to these flowers by the fact that it's not just a food stop for them, but it's actually, it's like a little sauna, a little insect sauna where they can warm up before they have to fly off into the cold spring air again. So heading back through now towards Badbury Rings on this, there is barely a path here through the woods. There are a couple more things to see here, a couple more things to look at here. Over there in the hedge you can see some white flowers just sticking up on branches there, sticking up there. That's either wild cherry, perhaps blackthorn. It looks a little bit tall for blackthorn. Possibly bullace or damson. Definitely plum family, prunus. Okay, I think it's probably okay to rejoin the path now. The reason we took that small detour is it is quite muddy. And although I have got suitable boots, they will only provide a certain amount of protection from deep mud or water. Oh look, there's one more thing to look at there. There is the flower structure of wild arum. Not open yet, but just starting to emerge. So yeah, that was quite a nice little walk in the woods. And around Badbury Rings, that's the Badbury Rings up there through the woods, that kind of domed bit of woodland you can just about make out through the branches. Here's another plant that's very common on chalk grassland. This is cowslips, close relative of the primroses we saw earlier. In fact, you can really see it from, if you look at the flower, that's basically a primrose, isn't it? But unlike primroses, they have these tall erect stems with the cluster of flowers on the top. And here we get a closer look at those white flowers I was talking about earlier, almost certainly blackthorn, so sloes, which are a species of tiny, bitter, sour plums. I don't know if you're going to see this, but this might be the closest I've ever got to a skylark. Just on the rise of that little ridge there. Just on the rise of that little ridge there it goes, that's a skylark. You don't generally get very close to those. And it's interesting, it was actually nestling down here. Surely it's not got a nest here. No, I think it was just resting there. So that concludes our visit to Badbury Rings. I hope that's been interesting. We'll go back to gardening shrimp now, I think probably for some more planting of seeds. So here's another plant for our kind of fruiting hedge. This is Rubus ilesabrosus, which is a bramble species from Japan. And it grows about waist high and grows into a sort of clump forming waist high thicket of bramble stems with large raspberry like fruits on the top. Well, some sources say it's a hybrid. It definitely isn't. It's a distinct species. It just happens to be a bramble that produces strawberry like or strawberry shaped large raspberries. As you can see, it's also sometimes branded as funberry. Well, I'll be the judge of that. So this will need to be grown on a little bit longer in this pot and then probably potted up and overwintered before we plant out next year. We'll see how it goes. We might be able to plant this out this year, but it's a bit small. I think it was about £8 or £9 for this one little 9cm pot. I could have bought a bigger plant, but it would cost me about £50 or something probably for a plant that's big enough to plant out straight away. So I thought I'd buy the smaller one, grow it on. Hopefully it'll catch up quick enough. A parcel has arrived. I've been looking forward to receiving this. Actually, I don't think I need a knife to open this, but we'll see. Because it contains some seeds. Always like pass the parcel. Now I appreciate this video has been primarily about seeds so far. It is just that time of year. But these are something rather special. So what we got here is seeds for Asimina triloba, or Asimina triloba, the American pawpaw. These have been dispatched directly from cold storage, and they need to be planted straight away. Often the case with big, sort of solid seeds like this, they look a little bit like runner bean seeds. And it's often the case with big seeds like this that they need to be sown fresh, because there's a lot in there that can dry out. These seeds don't ever completely dehydrate. Like a lot of smaller seeds dry up completely and they have long viability. These are not like that. These do not dry up. So these are like chestnuts or something like that. Anyway, these need to be planted straight away. So I'm going to get on and do that. Now what you're supposed to do with these seeds is plant them individually in large containers and then grow one tree in each pot. I'm going to do that eventually. But I'm going to try to germinate them all in the same container because I just haven't got the space for all of these. So we've got 10 seeds. They're still covered in vermiculite stuff, just a mineral compost additive. So I'm just going to leave that on them. And I'm going to push them down to about double their own depth in this large pot. It's not that large. And those are covered up, and if those sprout, which I hope they will, I'll transplant them as small seedlings into their own pots, by which time the weather should have warmed up enough that they won't need too much coddling. Actually, before I water that, I'm going to place that in a plastic bag, give it a good bit of water, And close that up with the twist tie. Okay, and then that will go in a warm place. I'm actually going to put that in the airing cupboard, which is our cupboard that has the hot water tank in it. And I'll check that every couple of days for the sprouts to be emerging. It might take like a couple of weeks before we see anything emerge here. It might be months. It might be never. But we can but hope. And hopefully at some point this year we'll have some seedlings. I need at least 2 because the trees are self-incompatible, so I need 2 seedlings. I need 2 of these trees to be able to actually get them to fruit. And I think the other 5 seeds, I'll put them in a slightly cooler but still warm place. I'll put these on a warm windowsill where there's a radiator. So we've got 2 different approaches for them, which should spread my bet a little bit. So if one of those places is too warm or too cold, the other one might be the one that works. So again, good bit of water to just settle those in. And I'll tie that up with a twist tie and put that, I need to put a tag in that one because it's going to be on a windowsill. I need to remember what it is. So in a couple of weeks, maybe as long as a couple of months, we might have some seeds coming up. Who knows?
Time for the comment positivity section, and this is just where I'm going to pick out a few comments that either made me smile, asked interesting questions, or just generally contributed to a positive vibe. So let's get started. A couple of positive comments about the seafood stew recipe, which actually I already featured in the seafood stew segment, but thanks for those. It was indeed a really tasty stew. And I think actually what makes it really so nice is that there's a kind of 2-stage cooking process. There's the first bit which really develops a robust flavour, so sautéing the leeks and fennel and carrots and pepper, and then the longish cooking with the tomato in there develops a really robust flavour base. And then at the end the fish goes in and the green herbs, and there's this really nice contrast between robust and fresh and light. And actually that little squirt of lemon juice was fantastic on there as well. That really just lifted it. And of course optionally hot peppers if you like that. But yeah, I really enjoy making that stew. And the first stage with all the vegetables can be made in advance and then just reheated, add the fish, add the green stuff. And that way it's a dish that can be kind of ready for you when you get back from a long day at a blustery beach. Or something. Very good question here about the tide. How do you know when the tide will come back? I would be scared that I would drown. So I've got an app on my phone. I've got a tide prediction app. Tides are, fortunately, very predictable in most cases. And because they are just influenced by the relative positions of the sun and moon to the earth. And so tides are cyclic and can be predicted by deriving the harmonics of them. And so I'll put some screenshots actually of the tide app up here. And you can kind of flick through the tides. And very often my visit to a beach will have been chosen on a day when the tides are particularly high and low, so that there's a big tidal movement, because it means that if I go as the tide is just starting to fall, I've got the whole of that time while the tide is going out and coming back in again to explore the foreshore, which is where a lot of the interesting stuff happens, which is where you might find fossils. It's also where you're going to find all of the rockpool wildlife, interesting stuff like that. So yeah, I use a tide app, and in particular, now that we've moved down to Dorset here, the tide is not just a matter of convenience. So back where I used to live in Hampshire, if you went to the beach at the wrong tide, or if you found yourself on the beach at the wrong tide, the worst case was usually just that there wasn't very much beach to walk on. The tide was all the way up and there'd be a little strip of gravel or something to walk on, and you'd have to walk along the coast path instead. Here in Dorset, it's a little bit different. If you go to the beach as the tide is coming in and find yourself in front of some cliffs, then the tide can come all the way up to those cliffs and you can find yourself either cut off or washed away. It can be actually quite serious, and people do get stranded and have to be rescued. And unfortunately, some people get stranded and they're not rescued. So lives are lost by people going to the Dorset Jurassic Coast at the wrong time of day, at the wrong tide, and getting either cut off or swept away by the tide. So yes, it is potentially serious stuff. I never go to the beach without checking the tides, but fortunately checking the tides is really simple. Comment here on the mystery Fanta. If you're interested, I have a small bottle of Coke unopened from the Football World Cup Germany 2006. It's remarkably fizzy if you shake it up. Thank you for the offer. I really do appreciate it. Unfortunately, I can't receive gifts or donations. It's just not practical for me to set up any way to receive those in a way that would be sufficiently secure for me. However, on the subject of drinks that have been waiting a long time, let me just go and get something. I do have in my possession a can of Foster's Lager that may be older than some of you watching this. This is from the maiden voyage of the MV Oriana in 1995. And I was on board, and I bought a can of commemorative Oriana. I'm not really sure that you were meant to collect this. I think you were just meant to drink it and enjoy the fact that it was branded and it had an Oriana logo on it. But I bought a can and kept it. And I've had that now for 29 years. And next year, this will be 30 years old. So I think next year is the year we're going to open this and see how good 30-year-old Foster's Lager is. I'm not hopeful that it's going to be great, but it is still completely sealed. There's no sign of damage or anything like that. So yeah, we'll see what it's like. So stick around if you want to see that happen. A really interesting idea here, something I think would be fascinating, is once you have a collection of pottery shards big enough, attempting to rebuild a usable, if ornamental piece of pottery, perhaps something similar to Japanese kintsugi, it would be a lot of work, but I've never seen a piece like that before, and I have looked. And I think it would be an interesting challenge to find pieces of similar curves to form a basic bowl. That is a tantalizingly interesting project. So that would entail taking a huge collection of broken pieces of pottery and essentially doing a jigsaw puzzle that has no design for it. So making the jigsaw puzzle design up as you go and trying to find the pieces that are the right shape and curvature to fit together-ish into something that forms a vessel of some sort. I think it could be done. I think probably the way to do it would be to get a form of some sort, like a large shallow bowl, and perhaps try and join them while they're supported and cement them together while they're supported by the form. I think there's a temptation for people to say, oh, just cast it in resin, but I don't like putting things in resin for no reason, because it's just creating a big chunk of plastic that's probably going to end up in a landfill. So yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'm not sure actually how doable that really would be, but it would be a fascinating thing to try. Casting my mind back to that lantern that I made, where I tried to make a stained glass lantern out of sea glass and tried to fit the fragments together, it's harder than you think to assemble something into a particular shape if it's just random pieces. But I do appreciate the idea, and it's something I should be thinking about. This is again on the Mystery Fanta. I love how our visual interpretations dictate the taste so much, more than we would ever imagine it could. You saw purple on the can and in the drink itself, and immediately went to purple to the flavour. Really good point, actually. So they say the first bite is with the eye. What we see, what we hear, what we preconceive about a food can definitely condition our experience of it. A little anecdote here from back when I had a real job. I was working in the office and I was trying to remember an item of shopping that Jenny had asked me to pick up at lunchtime. So sitting there racking my brain, said, what was it, Jenny? What was it? What was it that Jenny asked me to get? Suddenly remembered and said, lemons! And someone across the room said, wow, that was weird. And they explained that when I shouted out lemons, they had momentarily tasted lemon just from unexpectedly and suddenly hearing the word shouted out loud. So yeah, our non-taste perceptions of stuff can affect our actual taste perception when we taste a thing or before we taste a thing. So yeah, I think you're right that I opened a purple can, I poured out a purple drink, and my taste perception was looking for something that should be purple. And so I went to purple yams and purple this and that. And in fact, it was supposed to be strawberry cheesecake. Even once I knew it was strawberry cheesecake, it was a pretty tenuous match, I thought. But I wasn't even thinking about strawberries because I was looking for something purple. Probably consciously and subconsciously. On the pattern pottery pickup, I love these competitive games with Jenny. It's always original and funny. I wonder how or who does decide to do these competitions. Which one of you brings it up? Has Jenny a say in this? So the initial concept of this kind of spousal competition was something I said, oh, well, hey, why don't we do this? So I guess I'll take credit for the initial idea. But yeah, it definitely is collaboration. So we've sat down and said, okay, well, what else can we do about this? So like the berry picking episodes were Jenny's idea. So Jenny, quite early on in the series, said, hey, we could just go and when the blackberries are in or when the bilberries are in, we could go and do that. We've got another one, which I hope is going to be really good, coming up fairly soon, but I shan't spoil it. So yeah, it definitely is a collaboration, because Jenny's a creative and imaginative person in a different way to the way my brain works. And so some of the gaps in my kind of thought processes, Jenny's already way ahead of me thinking about. On the Crocodile-Doo video, Asda's own brand yeast extract is delicious. I prefer it to Marmite. It's not as strong, but has a certain je ne sais quoi. I agree. So Marmite, the most famous yeast extract spread in the UK, is the kind of main brand. In most major supermarkets, you can also buy kind of off-brand Marmite, so their own brand, it's not Marmite, their own brand yeast extract. And I mean, I'm not going to say people are wrong to like Marmite. It's popular for a reason and hated by some for the same reason. But I don't think there's anything wrong with preferring the off-brand. And in fact, I do prefer the off-brand. The off-brand yeast extract, I have a feeling, is made by the same company. Not made by the same company as Marmite, but it's the same company that makes all of the supermarket brands for Lidl, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Aldi, Asda. And so all of those jars in those supermarkets are more similar to each other than they are similar to Marmite. So if we were to buy a jar from each of those supermarkets, I think we'd find it would be almost exactly the same jar, contents and ingredients in the supermarket brands. And I think if we cross-tasted them, we might not be able to tell the difference at all. And they are different from Marmite. So the supermarket owned brands tends to be a little bit more spreadable, a little bit more kind of syrupy, whereas Marmite is a bit more like a paste. And there is a different flavour profile. It's always difficult to describe flavours, but I think the supermarket owned brand has a kind of more vibrant flavour than the Marmite, which has a stronger and kind of more matured flavour. It's just a bit more of a lively flavour in the supermarket owned brands than in Marmite. I don't dislike Marmite, but I will generally, as a preference, buy the supermarket owned brand. And I don't think there's any reason to assume that the most famous brand of anything is the best example for you, because everyone's tastes are different. So there's no reason to be a slave to brands. Often a brand will be good, and that's the reason they're prominent, is because they're good. But it's not always the case that you'll enjoy what they've done with it, so you might enjoy it a different way. Anyway, and I do. And in the case of yeast extracts, I buy the supermarket brands by preference. And then finally, this is back on the beach treasure video. Mike, several times in this video when you're commenting on apparent lack of fossils, I noticed that by your feet were mainly large rocks with visible oyster shells in advanced stages of erosion in sight, including at least one example that was possibly small enough to collect for extraction. It may be that you were discounting this type of fossil due to obvious damaged condition of the available samples, or because you already have examples of the same type in your collection, but as a now landlocked lubber, I normally notice this type on occasions when I've been out and caving in my native Yorkshire. Well, interesting couple of things going on there. On that video, I was very much preconditioned to be looking for ammonites and belemnites and sea glass and bits of broken pottery. And so one of the reasons I didn't even comment on those fossils, I think probably what you're describing here is what's called blue lias, which is a type of stone that is common along the Jurassic coast, especially at Lyme Regis, but Charmouth as well. And it's a kind of bluish, dark grey sedimentary rock, and it quite often has lots of conspicuous bivalve shells in it, and often kind of cut off and worn off so you can see the insides of the shells, or you just see the shells as rings. So blue lias is probably what you're describing there. I didn't notice that. I didn't even notice it because my attention was focused on ammonites and belemnites, and that's interesting, isn't it? But the other thing to mention is that often, because I'm recording on a GoPro, my head is not pointing in the same direction. My head and eyes are not pointing in the same direction as the camera. And so I can very often be pointing the camera at a thing and might still be talking about the thing that I pointed the camera at. But while I'm talking, my eyes are off looking for the next thing to go and explore. Or sometimes I'm just so focused on that one thing that I'm trying to point the camera at that I might completely miss something that's just right next to it. And yeah, I do often notice this when I'm editing the footage afterwards, especially as I'm doing that on a large screen. And so very often I'll see the specimen I was talking about on the camera, and I'll see, why didn't I look at that? Why didn't I pick up that thing? I think in that Charmouth Beach Treasures video, there were also examples of devil's toenails, Griffea fossils, that I completely overlooked. I'll see if I can dig one out actually and put it on the screen here, but I think there were some fossils there that I could have picked up. Fossils I don't even have in my collection. I don't have a specimen of Griffea, and I could have picked that up. I either was looking in that direction and didn't notice it, or I didn't notice it because I was looking somewhere else. But yeah, perception is a funny thing like that, and especially target focus when you're concentrating on what you expect to look for. and completely missed the gorilla in the room. Anyway, that's everything we have for this section for now. I think we're just going to go back to gardening shrimp one more time for an important message about seeds.
It's the 1st of April, and today we're going to be planting some peas and some lamb's lettuce. And I think I'm going to do it in this plot here. So here we've got shallots, and they're coming up really nicely now. They've sprung up quite fast in the last week or two. We've got planted here, but still no sign of it, fennel and 2 rows of radishes. So I think we'll do lamb's lettuce here, and then peas at that end, and there's probably room for 1 more row of something in this plot. So let's get this fabric off and get a drill prepared for lamb's lettuce. So lamb's lettuce needs a little bit more space than the radishes. It says 20 centimetres apart, so we'll go for about here. And lamb's lettuce is a kind of minor salad leaf crop. I have a feeling these seeds are going to be really tiny. Yeah, quite small, smaller than a tomato seed. So these we need to sow thinly into this seed drill. I have real trouble getting these spaced apart properly. Always end up with them sort of bunched up. But we can thin these out, and like the other things we've planted in here, the thinnings are perfectly usable. Right, so we've got some seeds left, and we can do successive plantings of this and get a successive crop. So we just lightly cover those seeds, and then it says keep them moist. That won't be a problem since more rain is forecast. We haven't had to water anything out here in the garden at all yet. Okay, and that's there. And then as before, we've got a little marker just to mark the row. Right there, lamb's lettuce. Now the peas are going to need something to climb up. I got some sticks that I cut from the woodland when we were just maintaining an elder tree that was a bit too big and in the wrong place. So it had lots of straight sticks on it. And I've had them in the greenhouse here over winter drying out. So I think we'll use those. We'll make a little structure and then we'll plant the seeds around it. So these pea sticks, I'm just going to push them into the ground in a kind of double row around about here, like this. Something like that. Peas won't grow as tall as runner beans, for example. Okay, so pea sticks are there, and actually I don't mind if the peas grab hold of this netting as well and twine up that. That won't be a problem. We're not going to take that off because this keeps the dog off the plot. And so now it's just a case of we'll plant some peas around the base of these sticks. So yeah, there's the pea seeds, a variety called Cereza, deliciously sweet petit pois. Of course, the thing with peas is if you pick them really young, you can eat the whole pod, which is probably what we'll be doing. And most likely eating them raw in salads. Anyway, these are the seeds, and I'm just going to plant a little ring of seeds around each of these sticks. So, probably just like this. A few seeds into each hole. I could probably just push these in with my fingers, to be honest, but I'll just scatter a few into each hole like that and cover them up. Anyway, that general idea. Just make sure there's no seeds actually sticking up out the ground. So I will push them in if I can see them on the top. Okay, so there's about half the row done. I'll go around the other side and do the other side. Repeat until done. Okay, so there's probably actually way too many peas planted here. I planted some in between the sticks as well, and in a row just to this side of the sticks. Oh, there's a worm escaping then. So again, we won't need to water that because it's going to rain. I think it's going to rain in about half an hour's time. And while we're out here, Here's a quick look at, this is the Saskatoon berry, which is flowering. Now, strictly speaking, I should probably pick off those flowers and not allow it to flower so that it concentrates its strength on growing. But I think that just means it's got its roots down, it's happy. We'll see how many of those flowers actually set fruit. It's not been fantastic weather for pollinators, so it may well be that not all of those are going to set fruit anyway. So if I get 1 or 2 berries off of that, that'll be nice. But if not, next year. Okay, we will just check in on these tomato plants again, because there's an interesting thing happening here. In fact, there's a couple of interesting things to talk about. Firstly, I've got at least 1 seedling of every variety now. So I've got Marmande is just coming up here. Golden Sunrise has gone crazy. This is Tigerella, I've got 3 of those. And Gardener's Delight, I've got 2. We might still get more yet. But anyway, so why are these plants so tall and so far ahead and the rest of them are not? Well, the answer is Golden Sunrise is an F1 hybrid variety, which means that it's been created from a specific cross between 2 different varieties, 2 different parent varieties, whereas all of these other ones are open pollinated and they're kind of perpetuated as a variety by crossing the plant with its own type. Why does that make these grow huge like this? This is called hybrid vigor, and an F1 hybrid is often more vigorous because of greater heterozygosity, I think it's called, where basically an F1 hybrid has a greater chance of having 2 copies of different alleles on the same gene locus. A kind of layman's terms analogy for that might be, if you're a tradesperson and you turn up to the job site with 2 identical toolboxes containing 2 sets of identical tools, you might be able to do the job. If, however, you turn up with 2 toolboxes containing different assortments of tools in each, you might be able to do the job better. And so it's able to do more because it's got a greater variety of genetic capability. And that comes from the fact that it's an F1 hybrid. It's a hybrid between 2 quite different parent varieties, which will have their own genetic weirdnesses. And the offspring inherits 1 copy of each of those genes from each parent. And so it gets a more mixed bag, which obviously seems to do it quite well. Anyway, we've got to do something with this because they are polyembryonic. Each seed has produced more than 1 sprout, and I only really want to grow 1 plant in each pot here. So I'm going to snip out 2 from here, 1 from there, 1 from here. And I'm not going to throw those away because now that these have got their second leaves coming, we can make these into cuttings, I think. So here's how we're going to do this. I just happen to have these lovely little glass bottles. Can't remember where I got these. I've had them for years. And I'm going to fill these right up with water, almost all the way to the brim. And tomato plants root very readily. The cuttings, the trimmings when you prune tomato plants, when you pinch out side shoots, for example, can just be stuck in a glass of water and they will just produce roots in a couple of weeks. So if you don't have enough tomato plants, you can actually multiply them that way. So I'm just going to carefully, without damaging the second one, snip out 1 of those seedlings, or 1 of those sprouts, and just plonk it in there, like that. I'm going to leave the strongest shoot out of each group. So for this group, it's that one. So those 2 are coming out. Careful not to actually snip out the whole lot. And I'll put 2 in each bottle there. So down here, tomato cuttings. Hopefully these will root and I'll have some more Golden Sunrise plants. More than I need actually, but one of my neighbours is interested in growing some, so I might have some plants to give away. Maybe in next month's video, they'll already be rooted and I'll have potted them up. So that's probably about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.